Welcome everyone and thank you for joining today's webinar on HR and the return to the workplace. Today we're joined by Anna Adams from TQ Solutions, who will be taking us through some of the HR issues associated with getting back to business. My name is Daniel McCulloch and I'm Associate at Smart Business Solutions, and I'll be your moderator today. We do have some time for questions at the end of the session, so please submit your questions through via Zoom and we'll endeavour to answer them. Today's presenter is Anna Adams. Anna is a principal consultant in TQ Solutions' HR Services Division, and her experience ranges from HR roles with large multinational organisations to small medium enterprises and startups. Her past experience has enabled her to build significant change in project management, engagement, industrial relations, and leadership experience. The format of today's webinar will comprise a presentation by Anna with some time for Q&A at the end. Welcome, Anna. What can you tell us about HR and the return to the workplace?
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you to Smart Business Solutions for having me along today. It's great to have a chat and talk about what we're seeing out in the market and hopefully provide some really practical and useful advice for some of your small business clients.
That's good. Anna, I'll transfer the host to you if you want to share your screen.
Wonderful. Great. Can you see that all right now, Daniel?
I can see that, yes.
Wonderful. Look, one of the hot topics we're talking to a lot of our small to medium-sized clients is around building an effective COVID-safe plan for their workforce. And I think to set the scene, first of all, in May, the Morrison government did announce its three-step framework, and there's been some really good progress around that, and we're transitioning towards step 3. But at the moment, the advice and the requirements are still that if you can work from home, you must work from home. So a lot of the discussions we're having right now are really with those organisations who have the option of working from home, office-based, professional services, really wanting to get their head around what do we do and when do we do it as far as returning to the workplace. Look, there's a lot of essential services that are already there. A lot of retail, hospitality have already gone back. Schools have returned face-to-face, which I think for a lot of working parents like myself has provided a bit of relief. And I think, you know, as you go out there in the last couple of weeks, there has been a bit of a sense of a return to some sort of normality. And I think that's giving a lot of those more professional office-based organisations a bit of a signal that now is the time to start thinking about returning in line with an anticipated July return to the workplace stage, you know, step 3 direction from the government. So I think, you know, we are getting a bit of optimism, we're getting a bit of a recovery kicking in there, and I think people are wanting to, there's this really increased urge to get back to normal, which we'll talk a bit about as we work through it. But I think, you know, to set the scene, although people are perhaps feeling a little bit more confident, some of the anxiety around the health and well-being, because we've had relatively low numbers, is starting to creep up. I think, you know, COVID is still a real and present threat, you know, especially in Victoria. You know, we've got 3 or 4 active clusters going on right now. Just looking at the news this morning, there's been 52 cases in the last 3 days alone. And I think in the last 24 hours, there were 18 and 12 of those were through unidentified community transmission. So, you know, although we had some relaxation of some of the restrictions planned for Monday, the news this morning is that they actually may have to hold back on that if the community transmission continues over the weekend. So, you know, I don't think we're out of the woods by any, you know, means. I think, you know, I guess we've got to be pragmatic about what is the reality of the risk, and the process I'll talk you through will have that kind of pragmatic approach to how likely is it to happen and what are reasonable steps to mitigate it. That's a big part of this process. But I think we still have to be very clear that the risk is still there, and it's probably going to be part of our new normal, managing this risk, you know, for at least the next 12 or 18 months until things like vaccines may or may not be possible and rolled out. So, you know, what we have found is a lot of those office-based small to medium businesses have actually done an amazing job of transitioning to working from home. They've done it in a very short space of time with very little opportunity to plan. But I think even though that has been effective, a lot of the people I'm speaking to are really feeling like the return to the office is going to help them get back to normal, be reassuring, and really they're missing some of the elements of collaboration and relationship building that they feel being in the office environment provided them with. So, you know, the questions we're looking at is, so when is the right time to return to the workplace if you have that choice? You know, how do you go about developing and implementing a COVID safe plan? And I think, to be really honest, a lot of those companies that, you know, your typical office environment, you're a low risk workplace, so they perhaps haven't had as much in-depth focus on health and well-being, health and safety in the office as, say, a manufacturing environment might be. So for a lot of them, this is, they've talked about it, but they haven't had to think about it seriously as they are now. You know, and what are some of the challenges relating to health and safety in that transition back that businesses should encounter and be thinking about and plan for as well? So that'll be the focus for today, and I really want to try and help you have some really practical steps that you can follow coming out of the session to get the ball rolling on that, because I think this is the time, if you haven't already got that plan in place, you really need to be thinking about it. So we're thinking about why do we want to return to the workplace and when. You know, I think, first of all, I am seeing a lot of clients who are like, gosh, we want to be back in the workplace from July. Let's build a plan to make that happen. And I think my first piece of advice is, before you jump into that, really stop and take the chance to reflect and think about the last few months. It's been a bit of a whirlwind. But, you know, what have we actually taken away from it? There's been this amazing global work from home experiment, you know, and it really has in many cases accelerated a change process, innovation, and opened us up to new ways of working. And I think for many of us that thought flexibility just couldn't work for our company, in many instances we've seen that it can do. So, you know, do take a chance to step back and not just think about what the challenges are, but what's actually worked well and what do you want to kind of build into the way that you work in the future. Because I think there's an opportunity to embrace flexibility, and as we talk through, you know, planning for disruption, I don't think, even if you're not a huge fan of flexibility and the need for that is going to be part of the way we work moving forward. And we'll talk a bit more about that later. You know, I think a lot of my conversations for clients as they work through this process, although their initial thought is we can return back to normal and that's going to be reassuring and we're going to get business, you know, generated and get more job security and address some of the anxiety our employees and we are feeling. I think the reality is, as we work through this plan, it's not going to be normal like it was pre-COVID. And we'll talk about some of the restrictions and the way people are interacting and some of the things that were standard before that just won't be happening in the future. And I think working through this process is a really valuable thing before you decide on when you go back. You know, as I said earlier, if you can work from home, you must work from home currently, you know, or if you've been working from home, you must continue to do so. That's still the current requirement. That may change in July, but we haven't got an exact timing around that. So a lot of the conversations I'm having is around build that plan, understand what's involved, get a real understanding around the impact and the feasibility and what it will look like for your unique business. And then that'll actually inform the timing for you as well. But, you know, what people are saying is they're really missing some of the culture and the collaboration, and I guess for some people the energy that they get out of working around people and in that workplace environment, especially if you've got kind of project-based stuff. And also, you know, for a lot of small to medium-sized businesses, they don't necessarily have the infrastructure and the tools and the project management tools to make that working from home work as effectively. So they're missing some of the elements of that. You know, I think for some that have really tight projects and deliverables, maybe an enhancement around being in the office. I do think it's kind of an underpinning thing around, you know, we want to get back to a feeling of normality, and I think some anxiety and uncertainty can be driving a bit of that. And the whole question around, well, if we don't do it now, when would we do it? There's no kind of natural transition if COVID's going to be around forever, so why not just bite the bullet and get into it sooner rather than later? And I think, you know, there is actually a benefit if you do this well to really see this as an opportunity to really engage with your employee and support them through that transition. And it can actually be a positive cultural and branding exercise for the companies that I see that are doing this really well. And we'll talk about
if I just jump in there, did you, given COVID and everybody are being forced to work from home, did you find there was already, you know, a trend pre-COVID to people looking for flexible working environments, and do you think that it's worked better than what many people may have thought?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we did a lot of projects around looking at benefits and enhancements, and a big part of what TQ is around recruitment and attraction strategies. You know, and even just last year, a lot of the work I did around what attracts people, flexibility was the number one
Mm.
initiative. So I think there was a real demand, and that was a real enabler. And in a talent short market, people were looking at that and kind of not even just seeing that as a benefit, but seeing it as an expectation to the way that people work. And
Yes.
I think in honesty, perhaps in larger organisations, people were a bit further along and embracing that and making it happen. I think for smaller to medium, size organisations, some of them were doing it well. But I think for some, this has been really pushed them to give that a go. And a lot of the feedback we've had is people have been pleasantly surprised around how
Mm.
effective
Mm.
this has been. There's still missing elements, but it's been a much smoother process, and they've actually seen some real benefits coming out of this. And that's been from some clients who are quite resistant to flexibility and worried about the lack of control and oversight that flexibility might give. But generally, the theme is this has gone a lot better than we thought it would be. But there's still missing elements of being in the office and feeling a
Mm.
desire to get back to that normality.
Yeah, there's
But
always
you're
a
right.
trade-off.
Yeah, and if you think about a lot of the trends we saw, is a lot of freelancers and the gig economy and people choosing to work in a way in a pre-COVID environment because of flexibility being the driver. So it was definitely a big trend and a big desire beforehand. I think this has been a big opportunity to change people's mindsets and see how effective it can be. And I think that would be a piece. I think this is going to be part and parcel of how we work in the future. I don't think we're going to go back to the old normal completely. And I think if you can embrace that and see how you make it work, you're going to need it while COVID is continuing, and we had some disruption with that. But I think rather than fighting it, you can think about how you see that and embrace that and see it as an enabler for your business as well. But what I'm seeing as we actually work through these plans, and I think the planning process is really valuable before you commit to a timing and a strategy. There are going to be some increased cost and risk prevention requirements for a lot of organisations. They are going to have to change the way they operate. They're going to have to put some things in place that will cost a bit more money. The reality is, especially if COVID escalates and the community transmission increases, going back to the workplace does create a bit more exposure to COVID. Whether that's in the workplace, things like public transport, travelling to work, there will be a marginal increase to that. And I think one of the big things that's a little bit untested is the increased liability for employers around things like workers' compensation. And I think we all know that's there and that's coming, but I think that over the next few months is going to be a really big focus, and I think it'll be some really interesting trends coming through. And the companies who have managed this well versus those that have just jumped back into it, I think there's going to be some really interesting trends around the impact on workers' compensation and liabilities to companies. I think, as you go through this with organisations, a lot of them start to think about, gosh, there is actually going to be an ongoing disruption. We're going into winter, people are going to have colds, they're going to have flu, even if it's not COVID. The reality is we're not going to have everyone just coming to work and soldiering on, and they shouldn't be doing so when they have low-level colds and things. If there's a genuine COVID exposure, it could be your child's school, where you get shut down and you have isolation imposed as a family. We're just going to have to plan for disruption. And I don't think even if we return to the office, you shouldn't be thinking that everyone is going to be there on an ongoing basis. There will be elements of people staying home, working from home. For those that go back earlier, there's going to be this kind of ongoing disruption around where we work and how, and that flexibility is just going to be part and parcel of that. And I think that kind of, as you work through this, reality of that becomes, true. And I think the reality of it, and we can talk about this a bit more later, is COVID has had a big impact on things like anxiety levels for workers. A lot of them have had to cut hours and have financial strain. There are employees there that have personal situations that make them more vulnerable, or family members more vulnerable. And I think how we manage through this is going to have a bit of an impact on employee engagement, their mental health, but also how engaged and productive they are at work, even if it's not just the sick leave, it's around that presenteeism risk and being at work, but how productive and engaged are they with all that other stuff going on. And I think that key message around, don't assume we can get back to the office and it's going to be business as usual. As you work through this and you think about things like not having maximum people in meetings, you may be back in the office and your team stand-ups or engagements are still done via WebEx, even if you're sitting in your socially distanced, desks and environments. And I think those, your team meetings, your morning teas, all those kinds of things that a lot of SMEs have put in place to drive engagement and collaboration, they will be different, in the foreseeable future. And I think getting back into the office won't feel the same as it did pre-COVID. So I think just really thinking about that and questioning, do we need to jump into it urgently, or is it something that we just take a little bit more time to work through, because the benefit in reality may be different to what you had beforehand. So I think the biggest takeaway I have for that is, don't just think, gosh, July, we want to get back in, let's rush into it. Have the conversations, do the consultation, build your plan, and that will inform your timelines and your strategy and how you go about it. And it's really just a good learning process for organisations and businesses going through it. So I think, once you've figured out, if you're looking at returning to the office, as I said, the first thing I think you should start with is building an effective COVID safe plan for your company. Look, and I think, just to put the compliance hat on for a second, I do want to be really practical and pragmatic, but, as an employer, you have key health and safety obligations, and these haven't changed as far as what you need to do, but obviously with COVID in play, the risk and the importance of this is stepped up significantly. And as I said, a lot of the queries we're getting are from SMEs that perhaps were low risk office-based environment and haven't had to focus as heavily on these things before. So this is a bit of a new environment. There's processes and skills that they're having to develop and a different way of thinking about it. But you, as an employee, you've got a duty to your workers. You've got a duty to others in your workplace. It's not just your employees, it's your suppliers, it's your customers, it's people that may be coming in, or you may be going out on site and visiting people if you've got a sales component to it as well. You actually have to maintain your workplace facilities. And I think there's quite a bit in that when you look at your COVID safe plan, where you need to lift the bar and actually focus on that and be more strict around those processes. You have a duty to provide information, training, instruction, and supervision. That's always been the case, but, in my experience, not necessarily always executed well in an SME environment. You need to do that to ensure people are understanding and implementing the right strategies. Really making sure that there's good processes in place to document that you've done that, just in case there was a claim as well. So I think there'll be more of an onus on showing, improving the process that you've gone through. And there's that duty to consult. So I'll go through this. My philosophy is, I think consultation is key, not just because you have to, but because I think it's going to drive a better outcome and going to be one of your main strategies to address some of the anxiety and employee-related issues that people are experiencing and seeing there. So you've got a duty to consult, to get their feedback, to adjust the plan accordingly, but also to inform and educate them around what's going on too. And why is it important? I'll talk a bit about the engagement and the effectiveness of the plan and the flexibility it will give you to work through disruption. But I think at the bottom line, there are significant potential risks for organisations from a financial perspective. You've got obviously spot fines, you've got workplace audits that can undertake, you'd have enforcement notices if you're identified to be doing the wrong thing. But if something significant were to occur in your workplace, there's individual and corporation have actual liability as far as significant financial fines, but also if there's reckless endangerment that ends in something like a risk to life or an ending of life, there could actually be things like jail terms that you could be liable for as well. So, again, significant reasons from a financial perspective, but I think practically, even if those worst case scenarios don't occur, the flow and impact around increased sick leave, absenteeism in the workplace, mental health, which can have an impact on the work environment, the productivity, as well as your workers' well-being and personal situation. And I think then that risk of increased workers' compensation claims, which I think is going to be a significant focus over the next few months as we get back into recovery. I think there's going to be a significant change in the number of those going through, because workplaces have had to implement new things quickly and they haven't necessarily always got the right processes in place, especially if they're rushing some of these decisions. So I think practically there's a real emphasis on why this is critical and why giving it time and space is really important. So I thought there's really a bit of a 5-step process that I would be recommending to SMEs that they work through. I think the first place is a bit of the consultation and the data gathering. So you really need to understand these things. And as we work through this with clients, obviously a really important part, and I think there's an engagement element as well as making sure that the plan that you build is fit for purpose for your business. Talking to your employees, how are they feeling about returning? What are they looking forward to? What's keeping them awake at night? What are their biggest concerns? What are some suggestions that they have? Do you really understand who are your vulnerable workers and what their situation is? And there's a variety of ways that you can get that feedback from employees. You know, some of my smaller businesses are just picking up the phone and having one-on-one conversations with people. But you might also have things like working groups that you can set up with employee representatives on there who can speak for people and actually be involved in building that plan, so they get a sense of ownership, you know, around the plan and how it works. If you've got leadership structures in place, getting them to really connect and engage with their people and feed the information up is key. If you have a structured health and safety committee, you can get members of that actually involved in seeking that feedback and working it through. But I think, you know, really understanding up front what's on their mind. A lot of employees are impacted in different ways. You know, we find there's a really equal mix of people who are excited about returning to the workplace and those that are really anxious and concerned. So I think understanding your demographics and building a plan, you know, with tweaks and adjustments in there to suit that feedback is going to be a really important part of the process. I think, you know, really engaging your people leaders. They, at the end of the day, are going to be really responsible for enforcing the plan. And I think getting them on board, getting their input and helping them feel a sense of ownership and the importance of that is going to be really important as well. I think you've really got to spend a bit of time around your workplace details and the logistics. So look at your floor plans. You're going to have to figure out if everyone can sit where they were with social distancing measures in place. And I think there's been a bit of rejigging and a thinking about that has actually impacted on how the plan rolls out for a lot of people as well. Your meeting rooms, what's the maximum number of people that you can have in there? You know, your communal spaces, your bathrooms, you know, all those kind of things around lifts and access points. You're really looking at your workplace and thinking about it with a different filter. And I think having all that information up front is going to make that planning and risk assessment process a lot smoother. You've got to think about your clients, your customers and suppliers. As I said before, you've still got a duty of care for them. And I think you're going to have to build processes around how those things are managed as well. What are their COVID safe plans? Do they have any obligations they want you to adhere to as part of that, especially if they're a significant part of what you do? For a lot of organisations, they are having to engage and talk to their landlords or sourcing and facilities team, depending on where they're based, if they're in a standalone site or whether that's a shared environment with other businesses. You know, for many of them, some things are not in their control, like shared lifts, shared bathrooms, shared kitchens, you know, communal spaces. So they're really going to have to partner with them and figure out some of those processes and how they work. And I think in many instances where there's multiple businesses in a shared site, so a lot of people who maybe were co-working or, you know, an environment where they had part of a floor and they were interacting with other businesses, there's a bit of collaboration that needs to go on there as well. So starting those conversations is valuable to build it into your COVID safe plan also. So a little bit of data gathering. And again, you know, it may be that you get a working group together. There's a lot on the plate of small business leaders at the moment. So it may be something that you task with your office managers or, you know, employee groups so they can work on this and pull this all together and support you in pulling together a plan. But I think getting all the data up front is a valuable part of the process. What I then suggest, and this is part of the government advice as well, is that you conduct a bit of a risk assessment or register. So you've got all the information available. A lot of this is sitting down and having a bit of a brainstorm and working through, you know, what are the risks and how are we going to manage or mitigate them. You know, I think when we look back at the duty of care, we're looking at reasonable and practical solutions. It's not the expectation that you know, eliminate the risk and put all these expensive and unpractical, you know, solutions in place. There is a reasonableness test to all of this, but what I'm doing with my clients is working through and identifying, well, what is the risk? You know, what's the likelihood of it happening? How significant an impact would it have if it actually happened? And what are some reasonable steps and mitigants that we can put in place, you know, to remove those risks or greatly reduce them? And I think going through and having that really practical hat on, there's some really good tweaks and adjustments that people have put in place that aren't necessarily onerous, but I think an important part of that process to put in place and have a good COVID safe plan. So, you know, I've listed some of the stuff there. I'm not going to talk through all of them, but as you get into the detail of that, there's a lot of things like, gosh, we only clean our offices once a fortnight and the cleaners aren't very good. You know, that's something that we need to actually step up and improve. You know, our lifts, we don't want to have people cramming into the lifts as we go through that, but we need to get our landlord to put signage in place and we need to communicate to employees the protocols and what we need them to do. You know, there's a lot of different things as you work through that, touchless bins, things like cutlery and plates as you work through it. You know, people are sharing cutlery plate. It's just a standard practice. Is that something you want to be doing as you return to the workplace? You know, lots of different elements you can go through, and there's fantastic resources that can help you with this process. You know, Safe Work Australia, the Prime Minister's Office, you know, the Department of Health and Human Services, all those links that I've put there, they've got templates, they've got tools. They've tried to make it as easy and systematic for businesses because they recognise that this is a new space for a lot of them and it's a challenging process. So, I think that's a really valuable process, and we do spend quite a bit of time, working through that. But what I find is get the data first, and, a good hour or two, often you can brainstorm and work through a risk assessment or register relatively easily, and it really informs your plan. And do utilise the resources available. And I think there's great tools you can work through to systematically get this done in a timely manner. Once you've identified your risk, it's really doing just pulling together a bit of a plan. So, as I've said there, I put an example that one of our clients has pulled together just to give you a feel for how it works. List your identified strategies to mitigate your risks that you've identified. And these are ones that, are realistic and are going to have an impact and need to have mitigations against them. I think it's really clear that you understand not just what we're going to do and have it aspirational, but who's going to own each element of that. Thinking about who is your responsible person and who does the buck stop with on site, who's going to make sure all of these things happen, and ensuring that they are actually aware of their responsibilities as well. Really critical that you include a clear process to follow should a COVID exposure or risk be identified. And I think this seems simple and logical. And I think, conversations with clients are around, I don't need to put posters up. People know they've got to wash their hands, for example. But I think in the heat of the moment and with juggling so many things, some of these things can be lost. And we have an obligation to inform and educate and communicate these things. So I think having a really clear plan, making sure people are aware of it, what would happen worst case scenario if something happened, will really help with the execution of that. And one of the examples in Victoria alone, most people would have heard of the Cedar Meats factory. An example of that where sometimes what may seem obvious doesn't actually happen in practice. A lot of the news around that said that one of the reasons that cluster became so big is 2 days after they received their shutdown notice, they actually called an all-employee meeting. And they gathered everyone together inside in an open environment. And they reported about 260 employees went along to that meeting. And look, apparently the focus was on hygiene, social distancing, what it meant for jobs, the shutdown, really important things to be communicating. But they actually attribute that that's probably one of the reasons why that cluster became so big. Now, you can sit back and go, you've had a shutdown notice. The worst thing you want to do if you're aware of social distancing is gather everyone together in a small place. But, again, there wasn't a plan around that proactively to manage it necessarily, and the business leaders decided to do that, and 260 employees came along and actually attended that meeting despite all the education and the news out there. So, I think you want to kind of assume that people know the right thing, but have protocols and processes in place to ensure that they have a clear plan to follow if that happens, because often you're acting quickly under duress and stress, and there's a lot of other factors at play in that situation. Once you build your COVID safe plan, I think you really want to communicate that plan and seek feedback. So that's pretty straightforward, but a really key part of that. Make sure your key people with responsibilities, your business leaders, your health and safety representatives, whoever's responsible for executing on the plan is on board and understands the role that they have to play and the expectation, and then go and communicate that employees and have a really clear flow process in there that they can raise concerns or questions and give feedback around the plan. Because I think that's going to be a really important part around them feeling supported and secure about returning to the workplace, but also give you an opportunity to tweak or adjust that if you haven't quite got it right. So I think that communication, education, and feedback process is key. And then from there, implement it and involve it. I think for a lot of people, there's a lot of preparation in the workplace that they're having to do, posters, adjustments, sanitization stations, touchless bins, lots of little things they have to put in place around implementing floor plan changes, for example. So a lot of them will have a date where they want to have that by, and then they'll have a date when they'll start transitioning back into the office. And I think you've just got to plan and be really clear in your communications that this will change and evolve because the situation is changing and evolving. You'll learn along the way, you'll look for ways to do things better, and the external environment could change and the government advice could change as well. So I think you just got to really embed that philosophy of we will keep managing it, we'll keep reviewing it, we'll evolve it, and we have to have an element of flexibility as we return to the workplace, which is key.
Anna, so what makes a plan really effective and what's most critical to the plan?
Look, I think in the experience, to set the scene here, one of the major, and we talk a bit about what we're seeing at the end, but I think a lot of employees are recognising they want to get back to the workplace. A lot of managers are wanting to get back to the workplace as well. But I think the reality there is COVID has had a significant impact on anxiety and mental health as well. And I think for a lot of employees, they've had tough situations like stand downs, they've got financial concerns, health concerns, a lot of other stresses at play. And I think although the health and safety and the physical well-being is a major element of this plan, I think that psychological safety element of it is really key as well. So the people that are doing it well are actually seeing this as an opportunity to connect and engage with people and really help them be part of the process and have a feeling of control. Because I think uncertainty can drive anxiety, and feeling a sense of control is a good way to combat that. So the companies that are doing this well are really spending time on the consultation and genuinely doing that, not just ticking the box, but using it as a chance to connect and engage with people who have been remote and maybe feeling anxious about returning. And I think, also communicating the plan really well and making that live or breathe gives people a sense of a certainty and assuredness. And my company's, my boss or my organisation is taking this seriously and they really care. And I think those consultation up front, communication and feedback as you implement it are two elements that are really going to help your employees feel more confident and assured about returning to the workplace and address some of that anxiety that a lot of the employees are reporting about the current environment and returning to work. So I think that's important in any health and safety situation and risk management process. But I think given the nature of COVID and the working from home and shutdown and the recession and the financial impacts for people, it's particularly important with a COVID safe plan. So do spend a bit of time and space on that and give it, make it a genuine process rather than tick the box exercise.
Certainly agree with you there.
Yeah. So look, 5 simple steps. Again, a lot of our clients, once you get into this, it's actually a clear process you can follow, and it's not necessarily that time consuming, but I think it's one to create some space and time to do before you decide on exact dates around when to return. And you'll find your plan actually evolves as you work through this process based on what you uncover and consider. So if we work through that, one of the things I want to talk about is what are some of the challenges. Now, to make it clear, for the small business owner, there's a lot of challenges at the moment, right? They're thinking about what is the future of our work. They're thinking about financial security. They're worrying about JobKeeper and when that ends and what the future looks like. Pivot is a new term. A lot of our companies we speak to are talking about how do we pivot, and what we used to do before COVID is not going to necessarily be the same after. What are transferable skills? How do we actually reposition ourselves in the new world? So there is a lot on the plate for small business owners. But I think specifically here, when we think about the COVID safe plan and the transition back to the workplace, the kind of questions and concerns we're having from our clients is, what about if I have team members who resist or refuse to return to the workplace? And I think where I have clients that are a little bit resistant to that true consultation process and talking and reaching out and asking people how they feel, this seems to be one of the true reasons why they're resisting doing that. Because what if they don't want to come back, and what do I do then? And I get that it's a difficult environment. There's a lot of complexity around awards and JobKeeper and leave requirements and how it all applies. But so I think there's a lot in that. But I would suggest the issues are still going to be there, and if you don't actually talk to them about it, you're not going to have an opportunity to actually address that and put a strategy in place. And in my experience, a big part of helping them feel comfortable and overcoming that resistance is letting them feel like they've got a say and they've actually got an input into the plan and the transition. So although I understand you might be worried there's resistance, you're never going to overcome it unless you start to ask the questions and uncover the cause of that. And I think that'll lead to a better strategy. I think where people do resist or refuse, you need to understand why. If it's a genuine health concern, or perhaps anxiety, whether it be mental health or physical health, or someone in their family perhaps that's vulnerable, I think where you can, you want to build a plan to support that, especially in this interim period. So maybe they can continue to work from home. Maybe there are transitions like avoiding public transport and flexing their start and finish times that are pragmatic and can work. In some instances, people may be able to tap into their annual leave or long service leave in that transition if there is a significant anxiety and there's a way to make that work. I think in the first instance, try to understand what's driving it and what the key concern is, and do try and show a bit of flexibility in the current environment rather than just force them back into the office. I think the impact you're going to have on general engagement, their productivity is going to be better. Where the rubber hits the road, and we've had some clients where, you know, they've had difficult employees who they feel aren't being reasonable. You know, I think you need to take it back to at the core, is this because they don't want to or they can't? And if they can't, if it's a health issue or concern, they may have rights to things like sick leave or pandemic leave under JobKeeper or some of those leave entitlements. If a situation where they just don't want to, you know, there may be options like the annual leave or the long service leave, or perhaps, you know, them transitioning to reduced work patterns, where there's going to be some kind of negotiation process that you need to go through. But I think a lot of the time I think, look, are we really dealing with I can't and there's a genuine cause? Is it something where I just don't want to? And I think that'll inform the strategies and the tactics that you take there. You know, I think another piece that people are working through with this is, gosh, the reality of illness and the disruption in the workplace. You know, if you think about the idea that anyone who's got a sniffle can't come into work and needs to work from home, that a lot of us may be dealing with that genuine risk of having to go into self-isolation and go through testing because of some community transmission, even if we're not feeling sick ourselves. You know, I think there is going to be that sick leave impact, which was a concern before COVID for a lot of small and medium businesses. You need to be able to have strategies where you can revert to working from home very quickly. They need to be in place from a business continuity perspective. You know, really understand in your award and under the JobKeeper, what are their sick leave entitlements? What are their annual leave? What are their long service leave? How can we kind of tap into that and use it differently? You know, I think when you're planning things like team meetings, you're always going to have to factor in people maybe being in person or using Zoom meetings for the foreseeable future, even once you're back in the office. I think you need to be thinking ahead around that disruption that's just going to be part of the new normal, and how will you manage about it as part of your plan. And similar to that, if COVID escalates or more stringent restrictions return, you know, be thinking about that and what would that look like. You know, a lot of my clients are actually finding when they work through this, rather than everyone going straight back into the office, they're actually easing back into it. And that will help people feel more comfortable with it. But also if you're doing a hybrid, maybe 2 or 3 days from home or 2 or 3 days in the office, as we work through the next few months and the COVID situation plays out, it also makes it easy to revert back to working from home quickly if you had to, because you've already got those ways of working preserved, and that flexibility inherently in there. So as you work through the plan, a lot of companies are thinking, actually, we're gonna do a bit of a hybrid approach and have that transition phase to see how confident we can be about committing to full-time in the office on an ongoing basis. You know, a lot of business leaders I talk to about, gosh, what if everyone says I want to work flexibility on an ongoing basis? You know, we've done it. People have seen that it can work. In the past, we've probably said no to flexibility because we want to have a sense of control, and we don't know if flexibility can work. So I think there's an increased concern around, am I going to have to let everyone work from home? Do I lose control over that? You know, I think take it back to my original point around take the time and stop and reflect around what's actually worked to this environment. Is there something that you actually have shifted your views about flexibility, and maybe you can, rather than seeing that as a challenge, embrace that and actually have a more positive approach to making flexibility work moving forward. So maybe that's not a bad thing necessarily, and you can take the learnings and embed that in the way you work moving forward. But I guess also, you know, probably more flexibility around these things during these transition phases, especially if there's genuine health and safety concerns for people that are driving that. But, you know, as we get back to business as usual, there'll still be a genuine flexible working request process. And that's all governed, you know, around under the NES, around who has the right to flexible working arrangement, what is the process they need to go through to apply, what are the considerations that you need to consider as a business when you're assessing that. And there'll still be a process there where you can actually negotiate those to suit individual business needs, and then go through trial processes to really validate whether they work. So, you know, I get the understanding, and I think there may be a bit of an increase. I would encourage you to think, actually, maybe we can make that work, and that can be embraced as an opportunity and a benefit and something that attracts employees. But even if you have concerns about it because of the nature of the role or the business that you do, there's still going to be a process where you can work through systematically those flexible working requests, and pull those business needs into that assessment process as well. You know, again, employees aren't adhering to the COVID safe plan. I get it. Some people will take this more seriously than others. And I think, you know, for some people who aren't at risk themselves personally, or feel I'm young, I'm healthy, I don't have anyone in my family who's at risk, they may not take it as seriously as others potentially. So I think, how you engage and consult people, how you communicate that, making sure you've got people in the office who are actually spotting some of that stuff happening and are empowered to actually address it, I think will be a really critical part in those first few months to taking it seriously. Don't just set a COVID safe plan and then forget it. You've got to think about how you live it and breathe it and keep reinforcing those key messages. And again, if someone is actually not adhering to it and it's creating a risk to health and safety, that can actually be a performance management issue that you as leaders actually need to work through with them and address it as you would any other normal health and safety issue as it goes through. I've got a lot of people talking about mental health and the well-being of workers. I think that in many cases that's why people want to get back into the office, because they feel that sense of connection. For people who may be isolated, there's a benefit in returning to the workplace potentially as well. I think really using this as an opportunity to connect and consult with people is going to be one of your best strategies to support their return to the office. Understanding what their concerns are, helping them realise the benefits of returning to the office so they see that what's in it for me. But I think also having, where you can, a bit of an element of personalisation and control and input into the plan is going to be one of the biggest ways that you can actually create less anxiety associated with a return to the office, and flexibility in there where if things change you can actually revert and support their well-being too. So I think for the companies that do that well, this is an actual opportunity to create engagement, a sense of well-being focus as far as your brand and your culture, create a sense of really an engaged and valued employees. I think for people who do this badly, it could possibly exacerbate the mental health and well-being issue for people. And I think you're probably exacerbating your risk of presenteeism, which is where people are at work, but they're not engaged, they're not productive. And I think as unemployment rates increase, you do have this risk of people who are working for you because they can't go anywhere else, but they're negative, they're disengaged, their mental health is impacted. And I think that can create a real operational and financial impact for companies. So I would really encourage you to try and make this process something that adds value from an engagement and a mental health and well-being, rather than just give it lip service and perhaps have these flow-on impacts of disengaged employees that are not productive, don't want to be there, but also don't have any other options because there's not many jobs out there in the workplace as well. And look, again, workers' compensation claim. I think, we've all been kind of just trying to get through and survive, and there's been a reactive element to a lot of what we've been doing with JobKeeper. But I think as things start to settle and plan forward, I do think there's going to be an increase in workers' compensation claims. And I think the companies that do this COVID safe planning process really well are going to have a documented plan. They're probably going to have less claims because people will feel supported and those risks are mitigated. But I think even where there is a claim, having a really good COVID safe plan, showing you've done a risk assessment, you've met your duty and your obligations around communicating and educating and giving people a chance to give feedback, all of that will help defend some of those workers' compensation claims if they do occur. So I think it would reduce your risk of actually having them occur because your risks will be mitigated, but it also gives you a really good defense strategy if you had to manage into that, to show that you've done the right thing and you've met your duty of care as an employer as well. So those are the key issues that we're talking about. And I think, again, what I've found for a lot of our small business clients is going through this process in itself is really valuable as far as informing a good strategy, timing and plan to return. And I think the ones that are doing it really, really well are really using it as an opportunity to engage and consult and create a connection and a supportive environment for their employees who are transitioning back into the workplace. And that's having a positive brand impact, but also I think mitigating some of the mental health and anxiety issues that are out there and on the rise because of COVID and the flow and impacts of that as well.
Yeah. So that was really great, Anna. I think, you've definitely provided a lot of valuable practical advice for many, small and medium businesses that might not have that in-house HR resource on hand, help them through this. We have a couple of questions.
Sure.
What trends are you seeing at present in regards to returning to the workplace? What are people doing right now?
Look, it's really interesting. I'm seeing a bit of a difference. With TQ, we work with a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, but also larger organisations as well. when I talked a bit about flexibility and reflecting on what, there's been challenges with working from home, but I think a lot of companies are actually seeing that there's some stuff that they've learned from and they've done really well. And I think flexibility seems to be one of those big pieces. A lot of the larger organizations we're seeing are actually thinking about how they manage their workforce and where they manage their workforce differently. We're seeing a lot of large organizations not actually talking about returning to the workforce until at least next year. So I would say the larger end of town, a lot of them where they don't have to return to the workforce, they're in no rush. I think some of the, there are actually companies who are thinking about, do we ever need to return at all? You've got call centers that are transitioning to, call center environments which traditionally were very face-to-face are trying to be set up at home, working from home and thinking about, can we do that on an ongoing basis? And I think that's because it's worked so well. They've been surprised by that. But I think also in a recession where cost is a focus, a lot of the big end of town are thinking, is there an opportunity to actually save a lot on some of the commercial costs around renting spaces and facilitating that? So, a lot of our clients are talking about maybe we go to a hybrid work where you have to from the office but work from home, have rosters, partial arrangements, and we can actually rationalize and save a significant variable cost as far as the cost of real estate and sites and facilities that go with that. So I think there's been a real shift in how big end of town are working with that.
Certainly.
As
well. And just to recap, so what do you see as the main risk to employers moving forward, and how can they look to manage that in a very practical way?
Look, I think we've touched on a little bit of that. I think there's obviously a clear-cut increased risk around COVID. And I know at the moment in Australia, we're really in a lucky position where we haven't got huge case numbers. And I think a lot of us are feeling more secure than if you were, say, in the UK or the US. But I think that can change. So I think there is a risk of community transmission. There is a risk of COVID. But I mean, even if it's not genuine COVID, I think there's a real risk of disruption in the workplace because of exposure or risk mitigants kicking in and creating people not being able to work, increased absenteeism. I think there is a real risk around the effects of anxiety and mental health in the workplace, not just because of COVID, but because of the economic impacts of COVID on them, on their family. So I think even if you sit there and go, gosh, COVID's not that likely, I think the reality is the economic impacts and some of the restrictions and measures in we place is a big risk to employees and is having a really big impact. So I think for organisations that rush this or think, we'll just chuck up some posters, everyone knows what they have to do, it's fine. I think you're not going to have a really effective plan. You're going to miss an opportunity to engage with your employees, and actually you could drive dissent and frustration and resentment from your employees and be inadvertently sending the message, we don't really care about you and your well-being and what's happening for you. And I think that will flow on to, I don't think necessarily people are going to be leaving. I think the economy and the number of jobs out there and unemployment rates, people are unlikely to resign, but I think you've got a real risk of people being present but being disengaged and being unproductive. And I think, your culture impacts are going to be really significant. And I think the reality is if you're an organization where in the future you're going to have to do more with less, you're really going to want to have a team of people that are engaged and productive and effective. And although these may seem like little things and compromises, if you have a disengaged workforce who can't go anywhere else, I think there's going to be a real challenge for SMEs around how do they be flexible, pivot, be more effective and productive if they haven't actually supported their employees along that journey. And as much as I think I am hearing business leaders say, look, people aren't going to leave because they're not going to have an option, that's actually that risk though of what if they don't leave and they don't want to be there, and what's that going to mean from an effectiveness and a workforce perspective. And I do coach leaders I'm talking to around thinking, yeah, it's a different job market, but there's still a risk of lack of productivity engagement if you don't manage through this process effectively.
Okay. And for businesses out there that are looking for some support in this area, what are the next steps?
Look, obviously I think first of all, there's a lot of free information. The government has done a great job around pulling together some fantastic resources to help people through that. But, I think as far as how TQ can support, we're really happy to have a complimentary conversation. We can talk through, every business is different, their situation's different. the challenges they're facing will be fairly different. So we're having a lot of conversations with people and have a complimentary, 45 minutes or an hour or so just to chat through what's happening in your world and whether TQ can help you with that. We're really pragmatic around understanding that you want solutions that suit your business, risk for return, bang for your buck, all those types of elements. And an initial conversation is a really good way to go. It may be that we can solve and put you in the right direction with that, but if there's more support that you need, we've got a team of HR, experts who can work with you. And part of our model, which is a bit different, is you only pay for what you utilise. There's no lock-in contracts. We can, give you an hour or two of support, and that might be enough to get you on your way. Or we can look at, more of a partnership model over a longer period of time, which we do for a lot of our clients who are SMEs who don't have in-house HR experts, but are finding because of all these challenges, they want a bit more of an ongoing relationship and maybe half a day a week, but, a little bit more expertise and advice as they navigate through now and the coming months, because there will be there will be more challenging and it's evolving situation, and you need people to talk to and help you navigate through that at times, which we are very happy to do.
All right, so is there anything else that you'd like to add or take us through, or do you feel?
No, look, really appreciate having the time to come along today. I've tried to keep it fairly practical because I know that people have got a lot of balls in the air at the moment, and keeping it really practical and process focus is useful, but really happy to have a chat to anyone who's interested in discussing their situation more than happy.
Sounds good. Well, we might wrap up then. Thank you for everybody who has attended today. If there are any businesses out there in need of some additional support, please feel free to reach out to Anna and the team at TQ. I'm sure they'll look after you very well. Thanks again for coming, and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.
Daniel, really appreciate it. You too.
No worries.
Bye.